Everyone, this is actually my first video blog installment. The idea behind these is to actually use them as an addendum to my existing blog to talk a little bit about maybe comments people had about what I've written, and also just to comment myself on what I've been really talking about. And I felt it was important actually to talk about the process of, it's really about building any creative work or doing any sort of creative endeavor, or non-creative, but specifically with creative stuff, it takes a lot of different skill sets to bring something to completion. And I think that is the trick for anyone doing it to be successful. I think everybody has a talent, everybody has capabilities of achieving great things, but it's organizing your thoughts, taking them seriously, and putting one foot in front of the other without despairing, without getting worried, and keeping a positive attitude. In this day and age, you know, it is easier to publish yourself, it's easier to get yourself out there, but there's also a lot more voices. So it's trickier. But you can't even think about that when it comes down to creating the first paint stroke, the first guitar lick, the first lyric. You just got to think about the song. And so the idea that I was talking about changing hats, one of the people who commented, Emanuela, I mentioned it's like similar to wearing many hats, but it's not. It's, you can't wear multiple hats at once. And I think that was my point, in that multitasking makes your work muddled. And so it's important to put all those other things aside and say, you know what, I'm going to do some writing today. That stuff will get done later. And so I think that's the general point I was making. And excuse me, I'm looking at notes. You know, this is my first thing, so it'll take a little while for me to get used to doing this. But I mean, generally, when an album's being made, there is a team of people. If you look at the liner notes of any album, there's over 20 people, assistant engineers, assistant producers, all kinds of work goes into it, just like a film. The trick of doing something when you're independent and you don't necessarily have the budget or the connections is to figure out a way to do all of those things. And unfortunately, it takes a lot longer oftentimes to produce something from the beginning to the end when it's only one person or even just a band, because you don't have the luxury of many skilled people on the task at once. And so the first thing I went over was just the process of songwriting. And the process of songwriting really could be very different from one person to the next. I think the key is to keep an open mind and let things flow. When it comes down to, I used to do film music years ago, when it comes down to doing things that are more composed, things that aren't about necessarily making like a soaring melody or a soaring lyric, that process could be vastly different. Oftentimes that starts in the computer. And I think that's another point I wanted to make. I didn't go over that aspect of it enough, that when you're writing to film or when you're just writing electronic music, often the process begins and ends at the computer. And your basically library of sounds and the ways that you can manipulate it is your skill set. It's synonymous with knowing your scales on the saxophone. Because when you know your software, you could be creative with it without thinking about it. And I think one of my favorite bands, this is my final note, keep this short, one of my favorite bands is Radiohead. And Johnny Greenwood in specific is a composer. He actually wrote a number of film scores over the past 10 years. And even before that point where he got into film scores, he thought like a composer. And he used the software like a composer and layered it as if they were different parts. And I really use them as a huge inspiration to me throughout their work, especially from the time when they started really orchestrating things at OK Computer till current day. and specifically what he brought to the fore, which was the sound design aspect. And so at the end of the day, I enjoyed talking with you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to contact me, leave a comment. I have an email address on the page. And I'm looking forward to doing this again. I'm planning on doing a blog once a month, and maybe in between doing these video postings. So thanks for listening, and have a great day.